This quiz topic is India Constitution quiz. So let's start. First question. When was the Constituent Assembly of India formed? It was formed on 6th December 1946 as part of the Cabinet Mission Plan to draft the Constitution. Who was the chairman of the Constituent Assembly? Dr. Rajendra Prasad was the chairman of the Constituent Assembly. How many members were there in the Constituent Assembly initially? 389 members. After partition, it had 299 members. Who was the president of the drafting committee? Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. He led the drafting committee, making him the primary architect of the constitution. Which foreign constitution influenced the directive principles of state policy in India? The Irish Constitution. The concept of directive principles of state policy was inspired by Ireland's directive principles. When was the first session of the Constituent Assembly held? First session of the Constituent Assembly. 9th December 1946. The Assembly met for the first time in the Central Hall of Parliament on 9th December 1946. Who was the first temporary president of the Constituent Assembly? Dr. Sachidanand Sinha. He served as the temporary president for the inaugural session. What is the significance of 26th November 1949? The Constitution was adopted on this day, but it came into effect on 26th January 1950. After that, this day became the Republic Day. How many committees were formed by the Constituent Assembly? 22 committees. These were formed to handle different aspects of drafting the Constitution. What does the objective resolution signify? Moved by Jawaharlal Nehru on 13th December 1946, it laid the foundation of the Constitution's preamble. So our preamble of the Constitution comes from the objective resolution, which was introduced by Jawaharlal Nehru on 13th December 1946. From which constitution did India borrow the idea of fundamental rights? Fundamental rights, it was borrowed from the American or the USA Constitution. The Bill of Rights inspired India's fundamental rights. In USA, it is called the Bill of Rights. How long did the Constituent Assembly take to draft the Constitution? It took 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. So 12 days short of 3 years. 2 years, 11 months and 18 days was taken to draft the Constitution. It started in December 1946 and ended in November 1949. How many women were members of the Constituent Assembly? 15 women members. These included Sarojini Naidu, Hansa Mehta and Rajkumari Amrit Kaur. Total 15 women members were there in the Constituent Assembly. From which constitution did India borrow the parliamentary system? Correct answer is the British Constitution. India adopted the Westminster model of parliamentary governance. What role did B.N. Rao play in the Constituent Assembly? Constitutional advisor. He provided valuable suggestions and drafted the initial text. What inspired the concept of single citizenship in India? The British Constitution. Unlike the US, India has a single citizenship for all its citizens. The US has dual citizenship, one for its provinces or states, another for the country. But India has a single citizenship, like British Constitution. Who signed the final draft of the Constitution? All 299 members of the Constituent Assembly signed the final document. What was the initial budget for the Constituent Assembly? Rupees 64 lakh. The amount covered the expenses of the drafting process. Which language was the Indian Constitution originally written in? It was written in English and Hindi. The original document was handwritten in these two languages. Who was the calligrapher of the original Constitution? Calligrapher means who wrote in his handwriting. It is Prem Bihari Narayan Raizada. He beautifully handwrote the Constitution in italic style. Name is Prem Bihari Narayan Raizada. Which document served as the basis for the Indian Constitution? The Government of India Act 1935. It was a key framework for the drafting. So most of the part of our Indian Constitution is based on the Government of India Act 1935. Who painted the illustrations in the Indian Constitution? Nandalal Bose and his team. They created iconic artwork for the pages. When was the last meeting of the Constituent Assembly held? On 24th January 1950. After 2 days, it was uh, introduced as the Republic Day. The members signed the Constitution on this day, that is on 24th January 1950, and the date of enactment is 26th January 1950. From which constitution did India borrow the idea of a written constitution? The US Constitution. It was the first modern written constitution. Which amendment abolished the separate electorate for minorities? The first amendment. It ensured the concept of a secular state. Which country's constitution inspired the emergency provisions in India? The German Weimar Constitution. The idea of emergency powers was borrowed from this German Weimar Constitution. Who was responsible for printing the Constitution? The Constitution was printed at the Dehradun Printing Press. Dehradun Printing Press. How many schedules were there initially in the Constitution? Initially, it was 8 schedules. Now, there are 12 schedules after amendments. Who gave the idea of the preamble as the soul of the Constitution? Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. He emphasized its importance. How was the Constitution of India enacted? It was enacted by the Constituent Assembly, not by a referendum. Who moved the final draft of the Constitution in the Assembly? Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. He presented the final draft for consideration. How many amendments were made before adopting the Constitution? Around 2000 amendments were proposed and debated during the drafting. The drafting process continues for 2 years and 11 months and 18 days. So during this time, 2000 amendments were proposed. From which constitution did India borrow the idea of judicial review? The US Constitution. It allows the judiciary to review the legislative acts. Who proposed the national flag in the Constituent Assembly? Pingali Venkaya. He designed the tricolor, later adopted as the national flag. What inspired the division of powers between the Union and the states? The Canadian Constitution. It provided the model for a strong central government. Which article of the Indian Constitution provides for amendments? Article 368. It outlines the procedure for constitutional amendments. How many sessions did the Constituent Assembly hold? Total 11 sessions. These spanned on 65 days of deliberation. What is the significance of 26th January 1950? The Constitution came into effect, marking India's transformation into a republic. But it has a history, because in 1930, on this day, in the Lahore Congress, this day was declared as Independent Day. What was the cost of framing the Indian Constitution? 6.4 million or 64 lakh. This was the total expenditure on the process. Who proposed the adoption of the national anthem in the Assembly? National anthem. Dr. Rajendra Prasad. He announced the adoption of Jana Gana Mana as the anthem. From which country did India borrow the idea of a federation with a strong center? The Canadian model influenced India's federal structure. How many parts does the Indian Constitution currently have? It has 25 parts. Initially, there were 22 parts. Which prominent leader opposed the reservation system during drafting? Mahatma Gandhi. He supported social upliftment through non-reservation methods. Which day is celebrated as Constitution Day? 26th November, to honor the adaptation of the Constitution in 1949. What does Article 395 signify? Repeals the Government of India Act 1935 and other pre-constitutional laws. Who suggested the design of the national emblem? It was inspired by the Ashoka pillar. It was adopted as the national emblem in 1950. What does Article 1 of the Constitution declare? India as a union of states, emphasizing its indestructible nature. Which prominent princely state joined the assembly after prolonged negotiations? Hyderabad. It was integrated into the Indian Union after Operation Polo. What is the historical significance of the preamble's last line? It mentions we, the people of India, emphasizing popular sovereignty. Sorry, it is not the India, last line, it is preamble's first line. We, the people of India. How is the Indian Constitution classified? It is quasi-federal, features a blend of federal and unitary structures. Federal means state and center, on state government and on central government. This structure is called as a federal structure. Thank you. Jai Hind. For more such video, please subscribe our channel and like this video.